Hi there, I'm Evan Troxel. Welcome to my podcast about how technology is changing the architectural profession. Welcome back to the Troxel Podcast. My name's Evan Troxel. In this episode, I speak with Alvin Huang. He is a Los Angeles-based architect. He's the founder and design principal of Synthesis Design and Architecture, otherwise known as Synthesis DNA. And he is the director of graduate and post-professional architecture and an associate professor at the University of Southern California School of Architecture. And really, he specializes in the integrated application of material performance, emergent design technologies, and digital fabrication in contemporary architectural practice. His work spans all scales, ranging from high-rise towers and mixed-use developments to temporary pavilions and even bespoke furnishings. Alvin and I spend quite a bit of this conversation talking about architectural education in the midst of a pandemic. Not only how the mechanics of coursework has changed, but more fundamentally on how it is changing for a changing profession. I don't want to get too much into it here in the intro. I'd rather just have you listen to it. Alvin spends a lot of time kind of deconstructing what they're thinking about and their approach to delivering that education right now. I think this is a really interesting topic because it is a reoccurring one on this podcast, and that's really around the changing of the profession and how COVID-19 is actually forcing that to happen much faster than it would happen without the scenario that we find ourselves in. And before we jump into the conversation, I want to apologize in advance. The recording quality didn't turn out as great as it usually is. And that was because of one pesky little switch in my recording software that I didn't realize had been flipped. So for the next few episodes, unfortunately, the quality isn't quite up to my standards. I hope that doesn't really bother you, and we'll just get through this together. Thanks, 2020, for one more thing. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alvin Huang. It's good to talk to you. It's been a while, right?
Yeah.
I think the last time we saw each other was at the Tech Plus conference, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And obviously a ton of crazy has happened since then. But like you personally too, quite a bit has changed, right? Did you go full-time at USC?
I was always full-time at USC.
Okay.
And I was tenured. Well, I'm tenured, so the role was always a kind of joint teaching / research role, creative practice / research role.
Uh-huh.
But then now the role has expanded to become the director of graduate and post-professional architecture as well.
Okay.
And so now I would say the role is also more administrative.
Okay. Does it take up a lot more of your time now?
Yes and no. I would say the teaching is reduced. The research and creative practice is still there, and that's more, my parallel life of being a practitioner, and the type of work that my practice type tends to engage in tends to be more on the kind of experimental research side of things.
Yeah.
But then also the administrative side of things, I would say, has been a bit of a learning curve. It's something that I've been in academia for close to a decade, and none of that has been as an administrator.
Yeah.
And it's, I would say, no different than in practice, right? When you spend the bulk of your career actually in the trenches designing and working on projects, and then start having to look at how to run the practice.
Yeah.
It's a slightly different role, and suddenly you start realizing all the decisions that you had questioned before because you're looking at them in isolation relative to the project that you're working on. Yeah. Or the sort of individual kind of perspective of you as the designer, rather than, let's say, financial health of the practice or the human resources issues of the firm.
Right.
And you throw in COVID and the pandemic and systemic racism and the rest of 2020, and that's been a real kind of, I think, a different version of thinking about how to administer a program than previously.
It's a real design problem.
Yeah, it is,
with
and
stakes for
that's
so many other people, right? I mean, that to
right.
me is what kind of sets this apart from practice, is that you're talking about, whether you think of it the top of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid or whatever, like an upside down pyramid. It's like things will branch out from here. Whatever is talked about, thought about, discussed, implemented, and it's going to branch out with all the people who take that and run with it as like a foundation for their career.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's an interesting design problem, and I was, I'm sure that there's a lot of politics and stuff that go along with that on the administrative side. I mean, that's one thing when I was teaching at Cal Poly was something that I intentionally steered away from because, like you, like I had another full-time job as well, and it wasn't the only thing. So I can only imagine what that's like when you get, I don't know, is it strictly architecture in your department, or is it like an environmental design?
Well, the School of Architecture has multiple. They're not departments, but we have different programs. So there's the architecture program. There is the Masters of Landscape Architecture, Masters of Historic Conservation, and the Masters of Building Science. I'm the director of Masters of Architecture program, so graduate and post-professional architecture only. But that is one of the things I'm working on is expanding the program to include a Master's of Advanced Architectural Research in urban design or city design, one in kind of performative design, and one in a kind of conservation and social activism.
That's awesome. I mean, and I've heard kind of similar things from, and her name's escaping me at the moment. Maybe it'll come back to me, but the dean at Woodbury. It seems like at the School of Architecture.
Ingalil.
Yeah, Ingalil, and it's one of those things where now more than ever I see it happening, and I'm really excited. Is that there looks like there's been a shift, or there is a shift happening towards preparing students and for a future that's different than we've ever prepared them for before. It seems to me that for the most part, the architectural education is to train people for the current and past versions of what it's like to practice architecture. And now it seems like there's an active developmental strategy toward preparing them for this future that we are in the midst of designing. I mean, if nothing else from 2020, we can see that it'll never be the same.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that maybe right now is such a unique moment in the sense of, I was on a Zoom session the other day, a presentation with a bunch of faculty. I teach a class called ARC 409, where it's really something that we've used as a chance to kind of create conversations. It's just a discussion course, but it's one where it's basically so that the students can have discussions that they normally would be having like in non-class time, but now because the only chance to engage is in class time, we created a class
true.
which we created a class we created a class that was just to talk.
That's meta.
Yeah, so it's basically just almost like a weekly therapy session.
Yeah, I bet.
And one of the faculty, we just talked with Marco Sanchez. His work deals a lot with kind of social issues, and he gave a part of that conversation. He said, he's been teaching for I don't remember how many years, like 10, 15 years, and every year he tells his students how they will be part of the change of the future, and how this moment is architecture is evolving and change. And he said he had an admission, which is he never believed it.
Wow.
He said it was always something he said to students to motivate them and to get them to think about the work and try to get them to engage with it. But he said this is the first year he's ever believed it.
Interesting.
And that now we are in this moment that I think is very clearly not just architecture, just kind of societal change, whether it's because of, a post-pandemic society or a post-systematic racism society, or even a kind of post-environmental collapse society, thinking about how the intersection of technology and culture and the things that, let's say, the soft tissue of society versus the hard fabric of the built environment starts to have to really work together.
Yeah.
I've been reading this book, Sapiens,
Yeah. Yep.
which is a pretty amazing book. I'm not at all finished. I'm only like maybe a couple hundred, 300 pages in, but it's really been making me think a lot about acceleration and like how our society or how our world is changing at a pace that is exponentially greater than it's ever changed before.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this kind of weird moment now where, let's say, as Yuval talks about in the book, it's only in the last 10,000 years, even though we've been on the planet for millions of years, that humanity's had any sort of real impact on the planet. Mm-hmm. And then it's only in the last 500 or 600 or so years that we've become like this destructive force. Mm-hmm. And then now the rate of change that's happening, you could argue the window between, like, so this is my conclusion, not his, but I've been thinking about this, like that the change is so rapid right now that window between, like, if you think about with just politics or research or academia or practice, there's this window now between the seasoned, experienced professional mm-hmm. and that person being obsolete is a really narrow window now, mm-hmm. right? Like it's super narrow, and we've gotten to this point where like you're at the top of your game, but you blink and suddenly the game is past you. And we very clearly are seeing this in this current election. Like we're looking at the two candidates on stage. It's actually a little bit hard to look at.
Yeah, this stuff that you're being kind of influenced to rethink how things have been taught before. I mean, that's kind of where this comes back to, right? Is how do you adjust a curriculum in an established school of architecture to address the type of change that is being seen to enable students to be successful in this environment that we are seeing change before our eyes as soon as they're out the door, or maybe even while they're still there? Because to me, like when you say that, was it Mark? He was saying that the first time he's believed it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that to me now, there's urgency there, right? There's there's urgency to say like we have to change it. We have to change right now, and we have to change on many levels that are interwoven, right? And it's complicated, and it matters now more than ever. So, like, what are you guys doing to? I mean, obviously, you're having these conversations. You're having these like you said, these therapy sessions. Like, is it a real heavy feeling? Or is it a feeling of optimism and opportunity, or all of the above?
I would say all of the above. Like, I mean, I think one of the things that I keep telling students and faculty that we need to remember is that, the world has experienced a pandemic before. And, if you look at the, Spanish flu of 1917, it was a global pandemic. It didn't have the same sort of, we weren't globally connected the way we are now. So there wasn't the same sorts of conversations around it that exist now. But it did, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, actually have a direct effect on architecture. And you can actually trace the origins of modernism to that pandemic. And it may not be the fundamental basis of modernism, but it was very, very clearly an influence in modernism. And in terms of beginning to rethink the way we organize the city, the way we rethink architecture, the way architecture kind of was starting to reduce itself into a far more minimalist and, you could argue, more sterile environment that was directly related to a pandemic. Or even thinking about like the Black Plague in England, where the way they rethought cities and began to introduce public space and public parks for the benefit of the people, to particularly East London, where Victoria Park was near where I used to live in London, and its legacy was because of the Black Plague, as to why that park even existed at all. And we're at this moment now where all of these things are happening, and whether it's the pandemic, or it's the systemic racism, or the environmental crisis. And I keep telling students that, and faculty, that this is the moment where they can actually be at the forefront of thinking about how to do something different. because they're in the environment that's actually asking them to speculate.
Yeah.
Where when you're in practice, nobody's asking you to speculate.
Right.
You're being asked to deliver. And when you're being asked to deliver, you can't go beyond the known, right? Because nobody can take that risk. But when you're in school, you can actually speculate and provoke. And maybe one of the things I talk about a lot with students is the fact that speculation in many cases might relate a little bit like it does in, like, if we think about it less like speculation as, let's say, fiction, but if we think about it more like provocation, and the way, let's say, the car industry does with concept cars, or the fashion industry does with the runway. Concept cars are never going to be on the sales floor, and what's on the runway at Paris Fashion Week is not going to end up on the rack at H&M. But they very clearly, both situations, whether a concept car or, kind of avant-garde fashion, influences the things that start to show up on the sales floor or on the rack.
Yeah, it's like a necessary part of the process to actually change how you think about approach or outcome.
Right. And that there's always this kind of trickle-down effect. I mean, I'm not talking economics, but I am talking about like how ideas can start off really big and then they start to filter down, right? And, I think a really good place to look at that, and I keep telling students that as well, as in film, right? And if you think about film as a kind of medium that, film or books or any sort of authored reality rather than a kind of documented reality, where authorship is always contextual. And when I say contextual, I don't mean it in the way that we normally do in architecture, where we're thinking about site and location and urban fabric and things like that. But I mean more so in the sense of, let's say, intellectual, ideological, socio-political context. And if we look at, let's say, films that were made in the 60s, or films that were made in the 80s, or films that were made in the 80s in communist China versus films that were made in the 80s in, Reaganomics America, we can very clearly see the sort of ideological context as being different, and how they respond to that context, and what the film is as a sort of, let's say, Blade Runner, for instance, in the 1980s, as a critique of the 1980s. Right. And it is a critique of Reaganomics. It is a critique of corporate America. It is a critique of the separation between, world cultures, where, that was the moment when Japan was rising as a world power. And in that film, the kind of second language of the city of Los Angeles was a mixture between Japanese and Spanish. And there's these sort of speculations that are actually cultural commentaries, but now the way we can think of these cultural commentaries in architecture might be a little bit more, a little less on the fictional side of making them as a commentary, but we can actually look at them as more solution driven, and thinking about, okay, if these are the issues, how can we rethink them to frame more interesting problems to design for? And I think one of the things that I really have a lot of interest in is how architecture or design is, let's say, the way I see it, the best design comes from the best, not from the best solutions, but from the best problems. And the best design projects are those that actually present a more interesting problem than the one that they were given.
Yeah, so when you came to my course and you lectured, you talked about a structural engineer that you worked with that kind of had that kind of tasty quote. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so he's one of my mentors, a gentleman by the name of Hanif Kara. He teaches at Harvard Graduate School of Design and also has a practice in London called AKT, Adams Kara Taylor. And I spoke with him at a conference called Digital Architecture. And it was the first talk I'd ever given, public talk. And at the end, there was a panel discussion. Somebody had asked him what the difference was between a great architect and a great engineer. And he kind of jokingly said, great engineers come up with great solutions, and he kind of elbowed me and said, and chuckled and said, great architects come up with great problems to solve.
That's
And
awesome.
like he said it as a joke, but I really was like, that's actually exactly it.
Yeah.
Like the engineer doesn't question why there's a cantilever in the first place. They solve the cantilever. The architect questions why we should have a cantilever or should not have a cantilever, and why is it important to have a cantilever? So the structural solution is a response to an architectural question, right? Like an architectural provocation.
Right. Yeah, I love that quote because it kind of reframes the idea of how we work even. It's I think we've gotten far away from that. And I guess something I wanted to talk to you about today was kind of the importance of R&D and the importance of this kind of finding these opportunities in architecture to potentially push boundaries. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but I know that's something that you've done a lot of at Synthesis. I mean, I love how you post another failed competition. I love that. I think that is so self-aware, right? That like we did it anyway. And so I wanted to kind of get your take on why that is so important to you. And it seems like this is kind of working its way into the curriculum. Another question I have is maybe a tangent from that is like, how adaptable is the curriculum? How flexible is it during a time when things do need to be changed to prepare people for the new future? But getting back to this idea of the necessity of R&D and the necessity of kind of the exploration that you're on.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. Like, where does that come from? Where has it led you? Why is it still important to you? Because we see so many firms today there's so much aversion to risk. And that risk even comes with how we spend our time on something that may, like you said, like car companies still do concept cars for a purpose. Like it's very purposeful R&D, right? They're putting out products and it's different than architecture. I'm not trying to say it's the same, but they're doing it on purpose so that they will come up with innovation, because innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum, doesn't happen by itself. Like it's still purposeful towards an end. So like, how does that fit into architecture? Why have you purposefully integrated that into your practice and potentially the curriculum that you guys are working on?
So, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is, as I mentioned before, this sort of intersection between technology and culture. And I think that for me, that's where architecture exists, is at that intersection where technology and culture merge. And I think because of that, we can, let's say, look at this current moment as a moment where culture and technology are almost synonymous, where the way that we actually produce culture is technological. Like there's no way to separate it, and the only ways we're able to exist as a culture are because through technology, right? So like if this pandemic had happened even 15 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, like we'd be in a very different situation.
Sure.
Like if we didn't have Zoom, if we didn't have Amazon Prime, if we didn't have Instacart, and all these different platforms of social, like Google Drive, all these ways that we're actually sharing information and connecting to one another. But then if we think about that, how that might relate towards, architectural innovation as well, whether it's been because of, the invention of the elevator by Otis, or the mass production of glass and steel that kind of spurned, the Industrial Revolution and modernism, or even going so far back as like Brunelleschi's invention of constructed perspective. There's always been these technological innovations that were paradigm shifts in terms of how like you could almost look at all of those as a BC moment, like before and after.
Mm-hmm.
From that point on, everything changed. And we are now at this moment of like saying that, the rapid rate of change that's happening in the world and society and culture means that, if you're not keeping up with those innovative changes, but even more so, maybe if you're not thinking about what the next one will be and what its effects will be, or how to think about think about the ongoing ramifications of what the current ones are, then you're actually, becoming obsolete. And I think academia is one of those places, and architecture being one of those places where by nature we are a forward-thinking profession. Mm-hmm. Right? By nature, like I would say, another one of my favorite quotes, and I think it was in that talk that I gave to your class as well, is a quote from Florian Eidenberg, where he says that architecture is one of the few remaining spaces that exists for you to imagine alternatives, right? Like the actual act of design, the actual act of architecture, if you really reduce it to its very essence, is about imagining alternatives, whether those are physical alternatives, like for a site, that site could be different and it could have a building on it. What does that building look like? That's the creation of architecture. Or at a much larger scale, at a city, or at a softer scale, as a sort of way for people to think about their collective futures or the collective ability to exist on this planet. And I think that's where I feel like, this idea of R&D is really something that, let's say, coming from other industries, if you think about like what a car company or a shoe company or a computer company or any of those industries spends annually on R&D, their revenues are mostly going to try to make themselves better the next version around, rather than replicating what they've been doing previously. And the goal is always to be multiple steps ahead rather than trying to play catch up. And I think that's something that I'm a big advocate for. And I think in architecture, both, I would say the reality is historically my work on that has been more on the technological side, or on the, let's say whether it's from the computing side or on the fabrication side. And now I would say that what I'm beginning to think a lot about is that, going back to those issues of cultural context, or kind of soft context, my interest in those things as technology and computation and fabrication really stemmed from an era in architecture. Let's say my emergence as a young graduate and professional and practicing architect happened in a moment when there was, let's say, a surplus in world economies and stability in the world that afforded us to be able to think about things that were innovative for technological reasons. Now we're operating in a world that is at a deficit in, you could argue economic, but I would say more so in social cultural conditions. And those move to a higher priority. So I'm not losing interest in the technology. I would say I'm gaining interest in these social and cultural conditions that are mapped onto or mapped out of technology, in terms of being able to, think about how technology has cultural ramifications, how technology is filtered in the public sphere, how technology and algorithms can be biased, how, let's say, the systems of architecture, and this goes back to like rethinking the curriculum. I think one of the things that is a struggle, both for myself and my faculty, is that we can only teach what we've been taught. And we've been taught in a way that maybe some of us don't want to continue to teach. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've been watching this, but I've been, with my kids, we've really gotten into the Cobra Kai TV show.
Oh, I've seen
on
it,
Netflix.
But I haven't watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a fascinating sort of, like, okay, one, I will say it's very predictable and it's very cheesy and it's a lot of fun, as a kind of retake on the whole Karate Kid series and projecting into, the current condition. But really the core of that show is about this kind of disjuncture between, let's say, the 80s and now, and a karate instructor that is born and raised and educated in the 80s and has particular social norms about the way he treats people, and how those are related towards a millennial generation that doesn't share those same values. And now we're kind of dealing with that in a way in every, I guess, industry or discipline, right? Like we can't talk about things the way we used to, or we realize that, like if we look back at a John Hughes film from the 80s now, all the stuff that was super popular and we thought was fun and everything, like actually is totally socially unacceptable now.
Yeah. Doesn't quite fit anymore.
Right. And we have an issue right now where, let's say, we didn't realize it, but let's say the canon of architecture was defined and authored by an entirely dominant white male perspective that has established the criteria for how all architecture should be measured in Western eyes. Mm-hmm. And, I took a group of students on a tour of Venice Beach, walking tour of Venice Beach, to go look at, early projects of the LA school. So Tom Main, Frank Gehry, Frederick Fisher, Eric Owen Moss, a bunch of really, really great projects, really phenomenal projects that were like indicative of a particular moment in time. And as we were doing the tour, I turned and said something to the students, and I looked at them as I just realized, I was like, well, we're about to go see a group of buildings all by old white men. Mm-hmm. And I just realized that literally not one of you will ever grow up to be an old white man.
Yeah.
And it doesn't diminish the value of these projects that they were done by old white men, but there is an issue of them being able to relate to the possibility of themselves ever being able to achieve those heights. Mm. And so, representation does matter. And I think that's something that we are trying to address is, like, let's say, issues of the canonical versus the non-canonical. And so one of the things I've asked my faculty to do is that when they give a reading list of text, it's not a mandate, but it's an ask that if they can, whenever they present a canonical text, they're being asked to find a non-canonical counterpoint, like something that can go with that text that doesn't necessarily fall into the same category, that comes from a different viewpoint. And this process is basically me asking the faculty and asking myself to re-educate ourselves.
Let's pause for a moment right here and talk about our episode sponsor, Layer App, the must-have app for Revit users. Are you tired of digging for project photos, files, and field data days, if not months, after it's captured? That's the power of Layer. Layer takes all your project-related data, photos, and files and makes them accessible with the click of a button right in Revit. Find out more and start your free 14-day trial at layer.team/Troxel. That's layer.team/TRXL. By the way, if you want to listen to episode 280 of my friend Mark LePage's Entree Architect podcast, you can hear Mark's interview with Zach Soflin, the architect turned software developer who created Layer App. Get your free trial at layer.team/TRXL. And now let's jump right back into the conversation with Alvin Huang. Going back to where you kind of started this line of conversation is with the environment in which things are happening needs to be like it produces a certain result. And so it sounds to me like you guys are kind of actively trying to design an environment conducive of the type of change that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And the environment part's a really important part of this because, as you know, right now, like we're all virtual.
Yeah.
And that, I would say, is the biggest loss of being virtual is the culture or the environment, right? Like sure. the fact that my students literally, like I've been doing a series of kind of conversations with students recently just to kind of, you're no longer able to walk the halls and just stop somebody and go, hey, how's it going? What's class like?
Yeah.
So now you actually have to like set aside time and say, hey, can we meet? And I think a big part of that has been trying to figure, like, in the common denominator I'm getting from all the students is that almost to a T, all of them think that class is going really well, let's say their projects are going really well and that they're able to produce. But what they miss and what they feel has really suffered is their ability to connect,
Yeah.
And have, let's say, conversations with their faculty that are not during class time or that are random rather than formal.
Yeah.
Or whether it's with their classmates or,
It translates directly to practice as well, right? The things that people choose to do with their life are the outcomes that we're seeing happen. Producing work is not the only thing that happens at work.
Mm-hmm.
Producing projects in school is not the only thing that happens in university. And it's in fact, I mean, when you look back on, my education, my formal education, when I look back on it, the things that you remember are not necessarily the projects.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of that other stuff that happens in between, right? Like it is the in between. They say like on a tombstone, right? You got a beginning date and an end date, and the dash is the in between is your whole life, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that kind of hokey statement, right? It's like when you take that away as a key ingredient to the environment of developing people who hopefully won't go into this field and just be followers, but actual leaders, that is a huge piece that's missing.
Yeah, for sure. And, now that piece is one that, in a way, we have to fabricate. Fabricates the wrong word, but yeah, force might be a more apt way of putting it, right? Like you actually have to create it. Like it can't create itself anymore.
Yeah. That's a weird problem to have to deal with that nobody saw coming, right? I mean, because we can continue to get our work done and we can continue to connect on purpose, but those unintentional connections have so much to do with culture. Like again, bringing it back to culture, the culture part of technology plus culture and that intersection and where architecture happens. There's a huge deficit there.
Yeah. I think maybe that's also one of the things that right now is, in terms of the way we're looking at all of this, the other thing is to take it as an opportunity rather than a loss.
Yeah.
And one of the things I keep telling students is if they look at it the right way, this pandemic situation is not going away. And even when it resumes back to normal, the reality is it won't be normal the way we remember it. It's very clear that, let's say, the kind of work from home situation actually has a lot of benefits. Not to say that it doesn't have cons that go with it, but I suspect a lot of offices are going to have a much more flexible strategy about working from home in the future and working remotely. And in terms of reducing their footprint and reducing their overhead costs, but also giving people more flexibility in their lives. But you pair that with the fact that, let's say for me as a personal example, in my 20 plus years of experience in the architectural industry, maybe 5% of the projects I've ever worked on happen to be in the same location that I was in.
Yeah.
Like the projects just happen always somewhere else, which means you're always remotely. And now, because of this forced condition, it's become far more commonplace to work remotely. But we are now seeing that you can have a very specific skill set, which is targeted towards that, right? And that's something where now, maybe going back to the previous comment of obsolescence and rapid change, where we are seeing one of the fundamental issues, and I see this with my children's teachers. My kids are in grade school. The younger the teacher is now in grade school, the more effective they are. Because they actually are able to think creatively about how to teach online
it's not just muscle memory.
Right. And it's not more than muscle memory. The previous, because seasoned teachers in elementary school are using muscle memory that relates to a different exercise. Mm-hmm. Right. Like now you're saying, okay, well, the exercise is no longer in person. So your muscle memory is not the same. Like you're trying to force the physical classroom into a virtual space.
Right. Instead of rethinking it.
Yeah, instead of saying, okay, how do I teach in a virtual space? And the younger teachers are being really creative about it and are able to, find apps and find, different strategies and kind of different techniques, and they know how to use breakout rooms, and they know how to set things up so that there's kind of interactive moments where the kids are working together on the screen. And those that don't are actually just using Zoom as
a lecture delivery device.
Yeah, a lecture delivery device that is highly ineffective, and when students are checked out, they're checked out. And if some, like even things like muting and unmuting themselves is a challenge.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, we grew up in a time when a lot of our education in architecture was down a certain path, right? I mean, it was 100% focused on design, and a lot of the education of an architect is left up to, being a professional, working in the professional environment. And now we're in a situation where that's very difficult, right? To have those unintentional, learning through osmosis of being in an open office, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different examples of how that happens. Are you guys doing anything or at least preparing people for the mindset of you're going to have to go out and find this information and you're going to have to be purposeful about gaining it? Or how are you guys kind of addressing that issue with students who are not going to be working in, at least in the immediate future, in an office environment, and they are going to be kind of on their own a lot more than they would have been, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago?
Well, I mean, one thing that I'm personally saying to students is to think about the kind of, not just the restrictions or the constraints. And I would say this is something that I go back to design, right? So if we think about Joshua Prince Ramus and Rex and his comment or statement that design is about turning constraints into opportunities. If we look at the kind of constraints of this current condition and what it limits us to, but also more importantly, what it opens doors to. Right now, my students can theoretically say that they could get internships anywhere in the world,
right,
from where they're sitting.
Absolutely.
And I've told them that, I definitely don't believe in working for free. I think that, our profession, our industry has a horrible history of undervaluing itself because of that. Mm-hmm. But if there ever was a moment where working for free could actually benefit you or work in your advantage, right now working for free is probably a little bit different than it used to be, right? Like you could actually reach out to somebody and say, look, I can't find a job anywhere. I can use my time to work with you while I continue to work for a job, but it's not giving up the ability to continue to look for stuff because I'm actually at home. And I can, I don't have to move to another city to work for an office that I've really admired for a long time. I can do that remotely. But also I can do things like informational interviews, or I can, apart from working for free, you can actually do things that are reaching out and networking and connecting to people in ways that you've never, like, let's say a Zoom conversation now is totally normal and easy to swallow, of somebody reaching out and saying, can I Zoom with you for 20 minutes? Just want to chat.
Yeah.
Whereas, if I got that same request 6 months ago or 8 months ago, I'd be like, no, I don't want to have to go find time to go sit down in front of the computer and talk to you. But now it's just, now it's literally all I do, right? Like I'm on Zoom all day, every day. Right. This is actually a rare occurrence for me not to be on a different platform.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways that you can think about this, and, that they can have, let's say, also the ability to, let's say, do more freelance or consulting work at this moment where, you can take on lots of roles without having to commute between them or shuffle between them. Like right now, my teaching at USC and my administrative role at USC and that of my practice and my role as a parent all happen from one chair.
Yeah.
In one click, I'm doing one or the other.
Right.
Or sometimes all three at the same time.
Yeah. So what do you do to take a break from that? Or is it just heads down, man? There's too much to do.
To be very honest, I go to my room and I close the door and I lay on the bed by myself.
It's a me time. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's I have to say, like, that is both the blessing and the curse of the situation, right? Like the commute has changed for the better, but the distance from the work has changed for the worse.
Yeah.
So like now, whichever one of those roles it is, like from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, the desk is right there, the computer's right there. Like when my wife comes home, theoretically I'm off, but not really.
Yeah.
We
are in a world of complete connection at all moments. And that to me is kind of that is a tough thing to deal with, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are trying to learn how to deal with that and trying to experiment with ways to deal with that. Because you have the ability to be always on and always connected, right? Device on your wrist, device in your ears, like computers in your ears with your AirPods, right? You've got your Apple Watch on, you've got your iPhone in your pocket, you've got your iPad next to the couch, you've got your laptop on your desk, which could go anywhere with you. We have to figure out the boundary situation, because before it was really, really clear, right? I'm in the car. I'm not supposed to do all this other stuff. I'm supposed to be concentrating on this other thing, which is a great way to disconnect, right? Your mind may not stop going crazy, but at least your body is not following suit, right? Like it's still doing something else. And there's a little bit of mental health happening there. I think that's probably one of the things that we're seeing a lot. And I'm wondering too, are you guys doing anything with the students, kind of getting back to that aspect of this, where you're actively kind of coaching them on this mental health aspect of it? Because the workaholism that also is, something we've always seen in architecture, is even more something that has to be kind of addressed right now than ever.
That's actually something that, like, let's say the university has a lot of initiatives in terms of trying to provide outlets for them, also providing counseling for those that might be dealing with depression, and providing kind of alternative venues for socialization, happening more at a university level.
Yeah.
From the School of Architecture standpoint, and more specifically to graduate architecture, which is my domain, I would say, like, that's something we're currently in the process of trying to figure out. Like, I started recently doing what I'm calling it is kind of director's office hours, where it's just a 1 hour session a week that whoever wants to show up can show up, and we just talk.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be about architecture or about the school. It could just be about what's going on. I think another thing I'm interested in doing, and Doris, who's the undergrad chair, has been looking at, is like a book club or a movie club, something that would just be for students to get together and talk about something else.
Yeah.
And then, that's something that goes back to the previous question, which is like, how do we create this culture and support? And I think, the students are craving that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, the formal talks, like the lectures and all of those things, like, we went from having none of it to now having, like, let's say when the shutdown first happened, it was like all of those series went away. And now it's actually more the opposite of, there's so many virtual series to go, and you can go to lectures anywhere in the world.
Yeah, conferences are all free. Yeah.
Yeah. And all these events are constant, which there's a benefit and a bad part of that as well, which is, the benefit being that you have access to all this stuff now. The bad part now is, like,
it's a flood.
It's like white noise.
Yeah. Hard to prioritize or find the signal in that noise.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something that you said earlier that I wanted to go back to, when talking about how you talked about this kind of narrow window of obsolescence within the profession. And on some level, I think that's kind of a good thing, because it's going to allow for new ideas to push up through the strata of our profession. And And I think that's what a lot of students, come to a quick realization once they graduate and they get out into the real world. I mean, I don't know if you read that recent letter to a young architect that Kate Wagner posted online. It's I'll send you a link to it. But basically, she talks about how, as an architecture critic, she's pretty famous on Twitter as McMansion Hell, and she had the blog about, where she would diagram basically redline up these Zillow postings of McMansions, and I mean, she's a fantastic writer, fantastic thinker, and so she wrote this letter to young architects, and it's a collection of letters, and hers kind of stood out to me just because I know who she is, number one, but number two, she has a different take. She's not an architect, she's a critic, and she talked about how working with students is her favorite thing to do because that is the time, and you mentioned this earlier too, where students think about what architecture is and can be more than any other time, rather than, when you go out and work in the quote unquote real world, and there are risks and there are, there's aversion to risk and there's, this is how we do it kind of mentality, not necessarily coming at it from a possibility standpoint. And so students have to grapple with that fairly quickly when you go work in a firm, is that like you are now at the bottom of the totem pole when you're in school, you work in a silo unto yourself for the most part, right? And so like I kind of see this idea that you posed earlier as this narrow window of obsolescence as a potential opportunity. And I wonder if firms can stop thinking about students as software operators and more as idea generators. And that to me is an important shift that the profession needs to make, to inject fresh ideas of, like you said, where, us as Gen X have a certain viewpoint that we were in the cultural petri dish of our time that doesn't necessarily equate to the experiences of millennials today, and being okay with that. And actually being really accepting of it to inject kind of these new ideas and new ways in which the world actually operates and will continue to, because those are the generations that are going to come into leadership positions more and more. This whole idea around that narrow window of obsolescence to me is potentially useful. Maybe.
I see it as totally useful, right? Like, and I think, like I said, I go back to politics as the biggest example of that, right? Like, I just keep thinking about like how different that debate would have been last night if it were, AOC on the other side, absolutely, in front of Trump, or if it had been Harris, or like the issues that the world is facing right now are like require fresh views on them. And require rethinking rather than retreading.
Yeah, and I would like to see that kind of thinking penetrate our profession in a much deeper level as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's something where, maybe going back to, your comment about seeing young people as software operators is part of the problem, because I think one of the things that, I'm a big proponent of, and you've seen through the talks that I've given, is that I don't see software as it's a tool, but it's a tool for thinking rather than a tool for doing. And the doing part is it allows you to execute those thoughts, but you're thinking through the technology. Like the technology is helping you generate ideas. And I think, we now have the technology that can help us. And so those ideas aren't just about, let's say, the literal form of buildings, but also the things that formulate the form, right? In terms of the ideas that drive them, or in the case of the ability to visualize data or dig into data or connect to data. I think one of the things that we don't do enough of in architecture, and I think this is going back to my interest in computation, is thinking about how real data can be used as kind of criteria for not producing a algorithmic process that is a literal translation of data, right? Because I think there's always a misnomer about designing with data that you're basically just materializing a graph. Mm-hmm. But that data is actually something that can be steered and curated and is something that you can pull ideas from and begin to understand connections between different things, not just as a literal representation of generic numbers. And I think that's something that, we can see very clearly that, let's say the work of OMA and AMO, their kind of research arm, mm-hmm. I think is a group that has done really well in terms of being able to make very provocative arguments that are supported by data, rather than just making blanket statements or going down the route of this piece is exactly 30% bigger than that piece because it has more demand. But that you're actually beginning to think about things that are more indicative of like why something is 30% bigger, because it's actually related towards, it's not just something that reflects the consumption of space, but also is related towards the priorities that a culture has and the things that they value. And I think that's where, I guess because of this role now, like I'm constantly spending time trying to think about like what architecture is. And, previously I talked about it as the kind of intersection between culture and technology. Another recent kind of thought that's been going through my head is thinking of architecture as a materialization or expression of value systems. And so like value systems being the kind of systems that our cultures and the context that we operate in place value in, or that we define as valuable. And obviously we are right now at a moment in society where issues of, equity and diversity and justice and environment are extremely valuable, more valuable than they have ever probably been in the history of mankind. And so how do we give value to those things by designing spaces that value them?
Yeah. It's interesting to think about like, a few things that you just mentioned that I want to try to thread together a little bit. Talking about the computer as a tool for thinking is an interesting kind of topic. It reminds me of a lesser known probably quote by Steve Jobs, which early on in the formation of Apple Computer, he kind of put the thinking together that a computer is a bicycle for the brain for the brain. And it came from a study that was done that showed, basically how all different animals performed at their kind of peak performance level. And there was this graph of kind of like output to, I can't remember if it was speed or it was something like that, right? And it was like, how fast can a thing go on flat ground over a distance? And, they basically graphed all the different animals, and man was decent, but nowhere near like a horse, right, or a cheetah as far as like what was possible. And then there was an augmentation, right, which is what you're talking about, where it's this tool for thinking. And the augmentation was a bicycle. And nothing could compare to a man on a bicycle or a human on a bicycle, right? So that's what he started to draw the analogy of a computer being for the brain. And I think that your kind of version of that tool for thinking falls right in line with that. And it isn't typically thought of in that way as an augmentation. It's more thought of as an augmentation to production rather than an augmentation to the creative process or the thinking process.
Right. It's usually thought of as more of a tool for efficacy or precision. Yeah. Right. So we can do things more efficiently and more precise than we did before. But I think really beginning to think about it is now we can think things or draw conclusions or conceive of things that we couldn't have before.
Yeah. So then another thing that you just talked about as far as like architecture being an expression of value systems and being, I had a conversation with Reg Prentice on a previous episode of the podcast and talking about using data as a basis for design, and how there's a little bit of a blind trust going on right now because it seems the pendulum has swung in a different direction from like full creativity, right, to data-driven design. And to me, when you talk about architecture being an expression of value systems, I think that if we were to rely on data as the driver of design, that's very problematic because it's going to really make design dull. You may be able to point at it very easily and say, this is why it does that, because you have some data points to back that up. But I think one thing that makes architecture very different in the realm of like possibility is that it can express, it can be inspirational, right? And that isn't necessarily something that you can put or come from a data standpoint on. And to me, when you're talking about like expressing the way that culture happens, or creating space for culture to happen, and that being and talking about kind of the environment in which and how important the environment is for things to happen and be cultivated within, that's a necessary ingredient. And that to me is where the training and going through the design training that we've gone through really makes it different than data-driven and algorithmic kind of outcomes.
Yeah, and so I think I want to preface this by saying, like, when I say data, I'm trying to intentionally not talk about like a data-driven thing that is a pure representation of numbers, but more beginning to interrogate and investigate how data is procured and how it's used and how it can be curated. And I think if we think about it less like, one of the things I'm quite interested in is the biases of data. And, one of the things that we can see is that, like, let's say data is both collected and processed in a way that has to be authored, right? And so once something is authored, it inherently has a bias. And so what we can do is start to question the way certain things have been authored and the way that we can work with those things to either re-author or acknowledge the biases that exist in those things. And so I think I'm thinking about it less as a kind of pure performative aspect, but something that can relate to be symbiotic with an expressive aspect, or as you called it, inspirational aspect, or like that the hard versions, like the hard being the data driven, and the soft versions, like the aspirational, the inspirational, the kind of expressive things, can be more symbiotic, where we can try to do things like, I'm working on a project in the Arts District right now, and it's a art gallery exhibition space, and we have this fairly large double curve complex geometry. And a reference for us in this project is the ancient Mayan city of Uxmal, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico City, or not Mexico City, in Mexico. And Uxmal has this really strong architectural motif system of these kind of tiled panels with symbols placed upon it. And it's very expressive and very articulate, and the symbols have all these unique meanings. And one of the things we're doing is taking this project and using the data of not only being able to mine a kind of collective set of trying to read the symbols that are involved in ancient Mayan culture, but trying to draw parallels between ancient Mayan cultures with other ancient civilizations. And so we're actually pulling and finding glyphs and symbols that come from ancient Chinese cultures, ancient African cultures, ancient Greek and European cultures, other native cultures, and trying to find commonalities to produce a new data set of these glyphs. And then we're mapping those against a kind of recursive subdivision process, which is mapping the double curved geometry of the surface to actually look at areas of greatest curvature and lowest curvature, and so that the areas of basically, so the surface subdivides itself based off its curvature. So we have more acute high fidelity panelization in areas of greater curvature and larger, flatter panels in areas of lower curvature. And so the combination of those two things stops, and by mapping those paneling systems and those glyphs against that subdivision system, you get this really unique visual effect of referring to the ancient Mayan kind of motif logic, and that has a much larger kind of cultural connotation or reflection in terms of connecting to other cultures, but at the same time is actually highly related towards the kind of performative aspect of trying to rationalize that skin so that it has the fewest amount of panels possible, but the most it needs.
Right.
And so I think what's important is that those things are not none of those things is enough on their own to support the project. Right. But that it's the interrelationship between all of them and the synergistic relationship between all of them that gives them its ability to exist, or its strength in existence. Because I think one of the things that I've been very, very conscious of in terms of formulating a lot of my positions about form and performance is that we've gone through a period of, as I said, in pre 2008, of architectural excess and societal excess, where there was a period in architecture where if you could design it and you had enough money, you could build it. Right? It didn't really matter. Whatever, you could pretty much do anything. Technology could afford it as long as the budget could support it. We're obviously not at that point anymore. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how we kind of connect the issue of performance and form, and performance being an expanded notion of performance where it's not just about utility, but also about narrative and expression and inspiration and all these soft. Yeah. Right. And so like every element in architecture has the possibility of our architects' two dreaded letters, VE, value engineering.
Yes.
Right? Like every element has the potential to be a target for that, where we can replace it with something less costly or remove it outright. And I've always found that the way that you can avoid that is the more an element does more than one thing, the less likely it is to be removed or replaced. Absolutely. Right. And so if it's not, let's say, Disney Concert Hall, we could value engineer the form out of the building, and the building would pretty much operate the way it needed to operate. But if you look at the work of Frei Otto or Felix Candela or Pier Luigi Nervi or any of these, like structure and form and circulation and program and meaning and intention and light, like they're all connected.
There's a depth to that. Yeah, I was going to say that I've obviously found the same thing in practice as well. And not only is it limited to, and not to say that that's what you were intending to say, but not only is it limited to multifunctional, but also meaningful to the people paying for it, right? Makes an enormous difference in that VE process.
Right. And that in the end goes back again to value systems, because it also is not only the value systems of society, but it's the value systems of your patron.
Yeah, and not just yourself, right? Like that that to me is something that architects could do a much better job about, because it shouldn't be so much about your will of what you want to will into existence, for what it's worth, but it's more of a what meaning is this, and to whom, and if it can be more than you, that's a good thing.
Well, and I think that is something that is very clear to me, that at least with, let's say, the current generation of students and I would say for the most part young practitioners, is a kind of collective change of let's say, seeing architecture less as a opportunity for self-expression and more as an opportunity for kind of collective expression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's like a civic responsibility there that I don't think we've really witnessed in the past, not to this level, and just the level at which people kind of come out of school and are contributors to society in a much bigger way. There is like a civic duty and a social contract there that we haven't really experienced before, from what I can tell.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that like I'm very like, let's say the identity that I'm trying to help cultivate at USC is one that says that we want to celebrate both the opportunity for the kind of civic minded, socially conscious, community oriented architecture, as well as the disciplinary focused, visionary, innovative authorship of architecture, and that the two don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
Right. That saying that you do something that is socially minded does not absolve it from having to be or wanting to be high quality, forward thinking design.
Yeah, and I guess to reinforce what we were just talking about, the more integrated those things can be, the better chance I think there has to be successful and well regarded when it's presented to the public or whoever the user base may be.
Right.
Well, man, you've got your hands full. You're doing a lot. I there's something that I do with all my guests, and I'm hoping that you'll entertain this, is I ask all my guests, what's something that you do to help yourself perform better? Do you have like a personal hack? I mean, it could be digital, it could be physical. There's no framework here for this question. It's more of just kind of like off the cuff. What do you do, Alvin? Because you're seriously juggling a lot of balls right now. What do you do to stay motivated, happy, sane, all of the above?
Every morning I get up at, I can't say I get up. My alarm goes off at 5:45. I hit snooze a few times, and then I get up and get on my Peloton. And I usually usually between 8 to 10 miles every morning, but it's about half an hour of intense riding, and that's my outlet for. It's the one time of the day I'm literally thinking about nothing.
Yeah. Other
than trying to not die of exhaustion.
I have a Peloton too, but it's called a Specialized, and I go out on the trail and ride it.
Yeah.
And we've had some bad air quality. I could totally imagine that thing's probably been a lifesaver for you.
Oh, it has been. And I got it at the beginning of the shutdown. Well, I ordered it at the beginning of the shutdown. It took 2.5 months to get here, and it's been a lifesaver. I also cycle, and I don't have a Specialized, I have a Fuji, but I'm more of a road bike guy. But I have to say, it's very, very, very different in the sense that I can do it guaranteed every day without any interruption to my schedule.
Yeah. I can see some big benefits there.
Yeah, and as well as the fact that I can do it in a way where I can't, it's still me pushing myself, following someone else's lead, but there's somebody leading me. Where, I don't ever, when I ride, I'm just kind of riding, and I ride more as an urban commuter. On the Peloton, there's somebody literally saying, hit these metrics, and
it's motivating,
shaming you. and
Yeah, that's fantastic. I find that, by doing things like cycling or whatever the thing may be, it forces you to be present doing that thing. It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big difference.
Before the shutdown, for me, it was basketball. I played basketball once a week, and that was the one time every week where I focused on nothing other than what I was doing.
Yeah, and it can't be understated how important that can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So is there anybody that you're listening to or reading right now? You mentioned Sapiens. Is there anything else? I'll put Sapiens in the show notes. It's a fantastic book. But is there anything else that's influencing you right now?
Yeah, for sure. There is a book called The Color of Law that I'm reading right now by Richard Rothstein. And it's a kind of book about the formation of the urban fabric that we're currently living in, and how what we think of as de facto segregation is actually de jure segregation, that there's actually been, and it goes back to a lot of the things I was talking about in terms of the things that we think of now as like are actual individuals rather than systems can be traced back to a legacy of systems, where we talk about, we might have a racist landlord, not a racist policy for regulating how we rent.
Yeah.
But if you trace it all the way back, it all started with a racist policy that got inherited and abused and used by racist individuals. And then when you take away the racist policy, the legacy of those policies still exist. Mm-hmm. That's another one I'm reading. I have a stack of books that I just ordered, and they're all along those same veins. Another one by Ruha Benjamin, Race After Technology, which is looking at the kind of biases that are embedded into technology. And then on a more light note, as I said, I've gotten recently really into Cobra Kai, the Netflix show with about the kind of current version of Danny LaRusso versus Johnny Lawrence and the Karate Kid.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We introduced our kids to Karate Kid, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. We kind of went on that 80s movie kick, Goonies, Back to the Future.
Karate we did that too. Yeah, and Karate Kid was a favorite for us, and now I would say it's become another family favorite with Cobra Kai, where it's one where, all four of us can sit there and love it for different reasons.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, also an interesting reflection on society.
Absolutely. Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. So last question, total softball here. Where can people follow you online, learn more about you and what you're up to?
Easiest way is on Instagram, at SynthesisDNA would be my handle on Instagram and Twitter. Follow my practice at Synthesis Design and Architecture, and you can also follow me at a third account, which is at USC Grad Architecture, which would be the Instagram account for the grad program at USC Architecture.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, man, for being so generous with your time and your thoughts. I think that there's a lot of good stuff in this episode. I really appreciate you and everything that you're doing. It's fantastic to catch up with you again.
Likewise, as always, it's great to catch up, and glad to see you're doing this, and best of luck with everything. And I'm sure eventually when things are back to normal, we will run into each other somewhere again, and can't wait till we do.
Yeah, hopefully we will see you soon as well. Thanks, man.
All right, take care.
Once again, a big thank you to the sponsor of this episode, Layer App, the flexible database for architects that makes it easy to view photos, files, and project data right in Revit. Remember, start your free 14-day trial at layer.team/TRXL. Thanks for hanging out with us today. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.